Right, good afternoon and welcome to the Monmouthshire County Council's Governance Audit Committee on this date, Thursday the 12th of June. We'll get straight on with the agenda. First item being apologies for absence. I've been notified of one absence, that's Councillor Anne Webb. Otherwise, we're all present and correct. Item 2, declarations of interest. Could members signal any declarations of interest in the agenda, please? Phil.
I've got no declaration of interest, Chair, but I can see Anne Webb on the screen. So she's here.
Oh, welcome, welcome. I was misinformed. Welcome, Anne. Clearly you've got your laptop sorted. We'll move swiftly on to item 3. Item 3 is a public open forum. This is the opportunity for members of the public to make verbal or written representations to the council, to the committee, beg your pardon. I've not been made aware of any representations, so I think we can safely move on to item 4. Item 4 being the action list from a previous meeting. It continues to be very satisfying, but we have no outstanding actions, which is really good at this stage. We'll now move on to the first substantive item on the agenda. The first substantive item was item 8. It will now be, I suppose, item 5. And that is the SRS annual report and internal audit plan from the Torvine internal audit team, presented by Mike Cochrane, the head of internal audit. So, Mike, clearly we have read the paper. Please assume we've read and digested the content, but nonetheless draw to our attention key points. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. So this report outlines the work carried out in respect of the SRS for the year ending March 31st, 2025. It forms the basis of the annual opinion of the Head of Audit. It enables provision of assurance to yourselves as the Governance and Audit Committee. The audit risk assessment determined for 2024-25 that we would do 11 separate reviews, 10 reviews for the SRS, 1 review for Gwent Police. There were 8 full, 2 substantial and 1 moderate opinions. So the overall opinion was generally satisfactory with some improvement required. That's defined on page 2 of my report. There's continued maintenance of the improved achievement in previous years as the number of audits findings have again reduced. There will always be areas for improvement, and we recognised there was a small increase in the number of high-risk issues and recommendations. There's an expectation that all agreed recommendations are implemented and all opinions are at least moderate, if not substantial. This has been achieved. The implications for 25-26 work out again at 11 separate reviews. 1 of those will be a follow-up in Gwent Police. And a similar resource requirement for 25-26, sorry. In terms of the work for 25-26, 3 audits in Q1, 2 have been completed, which are the ISMS audit and mobile computing, and the identity and access management audit is in progress. The report does rely on certain measures and milestones. So the risk assessment to inform the required coverage, that was completed. The allocation of the resource, no problems there. Engagement with the SRS Finance and Governance Board, which we've had. Completion of the programme of work, which we did, and the obvious reporting of the results. This annual report pulls together the greater detail in the quarterly reports that go to the Finance and Governance Board, and this report has gone to its meeting, which is on Tuesday. Senior management of the SRS have received the report separately and they've accepted and acknowledged its content. So I can answer any questions if there are any.
Well, thank you, Mike. That was excellent. It sounds a really positive picture. So I'll go to members for questions. Start with Phil, please.
Yeah, it's just a query on the internal audit work conducted. There's a table here on page 72 that talks about the data centre GPA moderator says fields work completed 2nd of August 24. The draft was issued on the 6th of August 24, but the final seems to have been issued on the 20th of May 24. I'm not quite sure how we achieved that.
That would be an error.
Well, I know that, Mike.
I do apologise. I can provide that date separately to the committee if they want.
No, just correct it. I'm just showing I'd read the report, that was all.
I had as well, but I didn't spot it.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just one question. What do you mean by solar winds? It's on page 77 of our pack.
Yeah.
What is
SolarWinds is a network monitoring tool that they use. It's basically the name of the product.
Ah, right, okay. I didn't
It monitors
understand.
all the devices on the network.
Okay.
Okay, Mike, you talked about the expectation that management adopt each of your recommendations and implement them. Do you have any particular issues in terms of how management responding to your audit recommendations, in terms of either disputing them or taking an undue amount of time to implement them, please?
I don't have any concerns. The plan for the last 2 or 3 years had to be flexed for staffing issues and other reasons. The working relationship is going really well, and most, if not all, of the recommendations we make, they're discussed, they're explored, agreed, and there's a positive management action they put in place.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other members who wish to ask questions at this stage. So may I thank you, Mike, you and your team for your work and your diligence in this respect, and thank you for presenting what seems to be a very positive report, which has given this committee assurance over the robustness of control environment within the SRS. Many thanks, Mike.
My pleasure.
Okay, now let's move on to the Freedom of Information report. It's shown on our agenda at item 8, and this item will be introduced by Sian Hayward and Cathy Evans, I believe. So over to you two.
Yes, thanks. I'm here in 2 capacities today. One as Head of Information Security and Technology. The other one is in the capacity of Senior Information Risk Owner, or CIRO. So the buck stops with me with all of our information security. So the report is in front of you. It's to represent our compliance with the Freedom of Information Acts and the Data Protection Acts. It's packed full of tables, statistics, so for me to go through it page by page is a little bit onerous, and you will already have got your questions ready for me anyway. So if it's a question of detail, Catherine is your lady, because she's got far more knowledge of the detail than I have, but between us we'll answer any queries that you have on this report.
Well, you've set the bar at a very high level there. You'll answer any questions. Right, members, over to you then, please.
Thanks. The question about the subject access requests, if I've read the chart correctly, and as you said, there are lots of charts, there seems to have been a huge rise in the last year. 31 in 23-24, 112, 24-25. Have I got that right? If I have got that right, that is a huge rise. I mean, is there a quirk somewhere, or is there some sort of reason for that? Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I can answer that for you. There is a huge rise. Yeah. The rise. I think the phrase does what it says on the tin. That isn't a typo. There's been a huge rise. The 112 reflects the amount of queries that come in from, and there's a few examples there, Rent Smart Wales, the police being another one, environment agencies, those sorts of things where they come in and ask for questions, but, through not personal subject access requests, but information about people within Monmouthshire and the requests that come in. So yes, that is actually a reflection of how many more there have been in the last year.
Right. And you have no particular sense as to why that suddenly happened? Just one of those things?
Yeah, not particularly so, yeah. And because they come from such a range of places.
And I think it's a reflection that people these days want to know what information we hold. Want to know what information we hold about them, and that's on the increase of the subject access requests,
Yes.
particularly in schools, social care.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, it will be very interesting to look next year then to see if that is a trend.
Yeah.
Because it obviously has implications for your workload when you have that sort of increase. I don't know what sort of time it takes to deal with a typical subject access request, but it's not going to be quick, is it?
Well, we have to reply to them within 30 days, 1 calendar month. Some of those that are listed within that 112 are smaller requests for information, because they might not be for everything that you have on a person. They might be for, can you please verify that this person lives in this address, and when did they move, those sorts of questions. But with the full subject access requests, they are becoming more and more complex. The team who run those have said that they are becoming wider. Very often you'll have a family who perhaps have a few children. They may have moved county, there may be lots of records to pull through, and sometimes they can be incredibly onerous, and therefore it's very difficult to get them back within that calendar month.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I mean, that is really interesting, and we'll look at it next year, yeah?
Indeed.
Thank you. We'll go to Colin next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Same question for Sian as I asked last year, which is obviously as the head of IT, she's bidding for finite resources, and as the CIRO, she has got overall responsibility for the information. So I just see a conflict there that that if that role was outside, that she would be in an easier position to bid for the resources she feels she needs to do a job. And if she could just comment on that, Sian, if you could, thank you.
Yeah, of course I can comment on it, because the head of IT aspect is because I manage the contract, the IT contract that the SRS actually provide for us. So I'm separate from that IT resource. The resources that Kath was referring to earlier on was the resources in the team that sits within my remit, rather than the IT service, which I manage the contract. And yes, resource pressures are immense, particularly since more and more internal reviews are coming through where people are querying our responses to their freedom of information requests. We are managing at the moment because we are constantly reviewing the way that we provide the service and the efficiency and effectiveness of signposting people where we can, and give all credit to the team for doing that. There will come a point when resource pressures are going to be too high for us. They will be. And we'll have to rearrange the way we do things again.
Thank you, Sian. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Sarah, please.
Thanks, Chair. Given the additional complexity of some of those requests and the fact that presumably you're pulling information from multiple departments in many cases, are we holding data in a way that facilitates that?
That's a really good question, and that's why we are changing the way that we hold, store, retrieve, amend, delete, retain information through the ShapeOut Online project, which enables us to store it in such a way that you can make inquiries on it and pull the information through much more readily than we always used to when we had things in file storage receptacles that were out of date, and it was jam-packed full of information that we shouldn't really be holding under the Data Protection Act anyway. We've just finished that project after a period of 2 years. We're moving on to the education project. We're going to do that across schools as well. So yes, we are holding that information in a much better way. But there can always be improvements because, you know, some of the information we're drawing out isn't in that SharePoint Online project. It's in the line of business systems, and we have over 80 of them, HR systems, etc., where the information isn't in the format that we can readily use it. But we're addressing that through the introduction of a data team where we are sort of training people and engaging with them as to how we can better use that data and how they can better store it for us to move that data back out. Does that answer your query?
Thank you. So presumably that's alongside ensuring that we hold data in a way that facilitates
Yes.
Citizen-centred services.
Absolutely.
But also facilitates being able to produce access data on request.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Phil next, please.
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit naughty now, Sean. I wasn't going to ask this question until Audit Wales came on. But there's a section in their report, and this is Sarah's fault because she's just made me think of doing it like this. It says the council does not maximise its use of data analytics and formal intelligence sharing arrangements. Now that touched on what you were saying just now. So how does that link with your department?
Do you know what? I think Matt Gatehouse is online, and I think he would be the perfect person to answer this.
What a good
because he's
idea.
setting up
Come on,
a
Matt.
new office of data.
You know who your friends are, don't you? Well, Matt, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. For anyone watching online, Matt Gatehouse, Chief Officer of People, Performance and Partnerships. I think that's a really good question, and you'll be aware, Councillor Murphy, that last year we Cabinet approved a new digital and data strategy. As part of our work there, increasing our capacity and capability in that space, we are exploring collaborative arrangements with other authorities, and that was sort of wrapped up in a paper to Cabinet last month. And as part of that arrangement, we're looking to increase capacity in that space of data analytics. And it's that sort of classic thing that it's very hard to develop and maintain some of these skills as a small single organisation. But by working in collaboration with others, we're able to sort of generate the economies of scale and perhaps employ and retain members of staff with the skills that we wouldn't necessarily be able to afford to retain and hold as a single organisation. So we are in the early stages of that work, and something will be going on the plan shortly to bring that back to Cabinet, probably early in the autumn.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I'll probably still ask Charlotte from her point of view, but we'll wait until that report.
Okay, thank you. Go to Rodri next, please.
Thanks, Chair. The report says there were 213 requests handled informally during the year, and there was part of a process change. I think that's a very welcome common sense approach, but I just wanted to check, was that implemented this year, and are you going to report on that in the future years? Because obviously there is still demand on service.
Yes, indeed. It was something that was started, prior to this year, but it became its own sort of thing that we started to decide to report on it because a lot of the work that the team were doing was being lost because we weren't recorded on it before. I will say that we do reply to them informally if possible, but people are always offered the formal response if they want to. So we'll go to them, and quite often we don't need, because the team holds such information, they don't need to go to the service areas, so it's a much faster response, and they reply informally so that it doesn't take that time and people can get it. It's welcomed. In fact, I think only one person came back and said, actually, I'd like this as an FOI, so it was then put down as an FOI, but it does mean we can turn things over a lot faster, and the team have really worked on that this year, but going forward, we'll certainly be reporting on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony, next, please.
Yeah, just one query about the emails, which every time you raise the fact that 74 looks big, How many million emails do you reckon we send? Basically the emails are barely anything less than not 1% or something, aren't they?
There are millions and millions and millions, too many to actually count.
So
it is a tiny fraction, even though it looks as if it's escalating and it's a real big problem. It isn't.
It makes your statistic look way out of beam, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Hence why we've sort of made that comment in the report. Well, I could probably look into that and come back to you, but off the top of my head, no. But I do know that percentage is, it's minute. It does, yeah. And that's one of the problems with a report packed full of statistics that can be skewed in that. Hence, your questions are really welcome, so we can explain that.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up, so I'm going to ask what is a very minor question. I did ask this at the pre-meet of officers a week or so ago. The paper hasn't been updated, so clearly I've misunderstood the table. I'm looking at the second table under 4.2, the column headed 24-25, and in particular the number of internal reviews completed, which is numbered 15. Could you just explain to me how those figures in that 24-25 column actually reconcile? So I understand clearly that 979 is 96% of 1021, but my expectation was that 42 internal reviews were being completed. If the numbers were to add up, clearly I've misunderstood something. So Kath, please enlighten me.
Thank you for that. No, an internal review is where somebody's had a response, and even that might have been an on-time response, but somebody's unhappy with our response or whatever might have been said, and they wish for us to review again the response that was given. So an internal review sits completely separately to the percentages that are above.
Thank you. Good. Right. I'm just checking. Finally, there are no other hands up. So in conclusion then, may I thank you both for what was a very comprehensive and insightful report. And I think based on the paper and the discussion we've had, we can take a high degree of assurance over the arrangements for meeting our requirements in respect of the various elements of freedom of information, DP breaches and data subject access requests. So thank you yet again for your hard work and diligence in that respect. Okay, please feel free to leave. We'll now move on to the whistleblower annual report. That's shown as item 12 in your agenda, and I'm pleased to say we have Philippa Green, Head of HR, here to present this report. So, Philippa, over to you, please.
Many thanks, Chair. So, as you will have seen from the report, there was one whistleblowing case over the period 1st of April 2024 to the 31st of March 2025. The investigation into this case is now concluded and consequent recommendations have been implemented. The report also shows that in the last 4 years, 3 cases of whistleblowing have been reported and managed, with all investigations concluded, consequent recommendations implemented, or formal HR policies followed. From this, I conclude that concerns are being raised under the appropriate policy, and management of these concerns is timely and in accordance with the policy itself. It is recognised that it's important for all individuals, including colleagues, contracted workers and volunteers, to be aware of the whistleblowing policy and the expectations of them in relation to this. Therefore, to update the committee today, the whistleblowing policy was last reviewed and updated in 2024, and it's intended that the next review will be completed by April 2026. Following this review, appropriate promotion of the policy and any changes will be undertaken. In addition, and in conjunction with this, there's currently whistleblowing e-learning available, which is being reviewed and will be included in mandatory training and development activities going forward. I would welcome any questions or comments in relation to the data contained within the report and the upcoming plans to raise awareness of the policy, which I've outlined. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa. So, questions and comments, please. Well, Philippa, I think you've got away lightly.
I have indeed.
Clearly, so that people were assured by your report. And, I do think it is pleasing that the low number of whistleblowing incidents that you've recorded over the course of the last couple of years. Hopefully that's a sign that, there's little for people to be concerned over, as opposed to people not understanding what the process is. But I did note the point you made about the whistleblowing training and the promotion of a policy, how one actually whistleblows. So I think in summary, we can take comfort from the arrangements in place and the way that the whistleblowing cases are handled. Many thanks, Philippa.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll now get back on track. I'm now looking at item 5. Item 5 is the Audit Wales annual summary report, and I'll hand over to Steve Wyndham and, as appropriate, Charlotte Owen from Audit Wales to take us through that report. Over to you, Steve, in the first instance, please.
Okay, many thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, and this report is, you would have no doubt have seen a very similar report in prior years. It's our annual report, really, that summarises our audit activity, both financial audit work and performance audit work over the last 12 months, basically covering the 2024 period. I'm sure you've read the report, and I'm sure you've also recognised the fact this doesn't really tell me anything new, and hopefully that is the takeaway you've had from that. Because this report really just summarises and condenses everything we've reported to you, to this committee and other bodies within our previous reports. So it's just a single high-level document really summarising both our financial audit work and performance audit work. So you'd be familiar with, for instance, in terms of financial audit perspective, it reiterates the fact we issued an unqualified audit opinion, key audit deadlines were met, and the accounts were of good quality. They were the key message we communicated within our audit report last year in regard to the accounts. So that's it for me. That's all I wish to intend to say at the moment, but I'll probably give Charlotte the opportunity to say a few words too.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, nothing really to add. As Steve said, all these audit reports have come to the committee previously, so that hopefully there's no surprises on there. But yeah, very happy to take any questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Charlotte. As you say, a very straightforward report setting out what's taken place over that 12-month period. So I'll go to members for any questions or comments. No? Okay, all crystal clear, so thank you for that. We'll then move on to item 6. Item 6 is the Audit Wales Counter-Fraud Arrangements report. And then secondly, it's the management response in terms of how management intend to respond to those recommendations. So we'll start with our colleagues in Audit Wales, that's Charlotte Owen and Verity Pownell, who will talk us through the Audit Wales report. And then I'll hand over to Jan Furtek, our Chief Internal Auditor, as possibly Richard Jones as well, just to provide additional colour around the actions we're taking. So over to you, Charlotte and Verity, in the first instance, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Verity Pownell, and I'm a Senior Auditor at Audit Wales. So the background to this review is a report that the Auditor General published in 2020, looking at public sector fraud arrangements. The focus of this review was to follow up on the progress the Council has made in implementing those recommendations made in that report, and to look at whether the Council has put in place proper arrangements to prevent and detect fraud. So we undertook the fieldwork for this review between February and March this year, and just to sort of summarise the key findings, we found that the Council has a zero tolerance approach to fraud and has appropriate policies in place. The Council fosters an anti-fraud culture and is actively strengthening its approach to training. Responsibilities are clear, and the Council has recently invested in additional capacity to undertake counter-fraud work. And we found that the Council has a detailed fraud risk assessment and undertakes proactive work, although does not maximise its use of data analytics and formal intelligence sharing arrangements. We also found that the Council doesn't have a clear performance management approach for counter-fraud, and this makes it more difficult for the Council to gain assurance that its counter-fraud arrangements are effectively preventing, identifying and mitigating fraud. So overall, this led us to conclude that the Council has strengthened its counter-fraud arrangements, but there are further steps it can take. The report contains 2 recommendations. And the first recommendation is that the council should put clear counter-fraud performance management arrangements in place. And we provided some examples of what that could look like. So, for example, it could be sort of clear objectives for counter-fraud work, relevant performance metrics, and regular reporting, including reporting to the committee. And the second recommendation is that the council should ensure it is maximising its use of data and intelligence. So just in terms of how the council compares to other councils, we have a few reviews underway at the moment on this. So by the end of the year, there should be some more reports available to support comparison. From the reviews completed so far, the council sits favourably in some areas. So, for example, not all councils complete fraud risk assessments, so that's a strength. And we have made some similar recommendations to other councils on improving counter-fraud information, particularly information that goes to committees. So the council's in a sort of similar position to others on that. The areas that we felt the council could strengthen are reflected in our recommendations, and there aren't necessarily other councils that we found so far that have sort of notable practice in those areas, but there may be more on this once further reports are published later this year. The council has completed a management response form setting out how the recommendations will be addressed. We've reviewed the form and feel that the council has appropriately considered the recommendations. So, Chair, shall I hand over to officers at this point to speak to their response?
Yes, thank you, Verity. Yes, let's go to Jan just to give a bit more flavour in terms of the actions underway and confirmation of timescales are achievable, and then we'll go to members for questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can confirm the Council accepts the recommendations from the review, and we are pleased that Audit Wales have acknowledged the significant work which has been undertaken in this area over the past 12 months. We recognise that there's always work still to be done to improve our arrangements in this area, and our management actions will help address this. We have already given a commitment to committee that we'll review our fraud risk assessment during the year, with an updated version being provided to the October 25 meeting. That will go towards looking at how we've addressed the recommendations and within the required timeframes that we've put of October. A number of the recommendations we've already started to investigate to see how we can strengthen our arrangements based on the Audit Wales findings. So finally, we want to thank Verity and Charlotte for their hard work during the review and the constructive approach which the audit was undertaken.
Thank you, Jan. Let's go to members for questions. We'll start with Tony, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Fraud is a complex set of arrangements which people obviously try to carry out fraud. Recommendation 2, to ensure the council maximises its use of data, etc. How deep, I can't get my words up really, how deep do we go into looking at or finding fraud? What is it, how does it bring its head up? How do you pick it up, particularly on recommendation 2? Have I asked the right sort of question?
Yes, there's a number of different ways that we can look to identify fraud. So one of the areas that Audit Wales have picked up is regarding use of data analytics, which is something that we do at the moment. We use the National Fraud Initiative data set. We don't have any specific software that we use at the moment that we could use to help us crunch some numbers and to highlight any trends. That's something that we're looking at. We can also look at maximising use of AI, which I know some other councils have started to dip their toes in the water with as well, to see what matches that could bring. In terms of us finding fraud, it's obviously a difficult area. We're trying to be proactive as best we can. We're trying to review the data that we've got. Obviously, we picked a number of things up from internal audit reviews over the past year, and as well as making sure we've got that communication across all levels of the organisation. So if people do have any concerns, they firstly can identify it and then know where to report it. And that's what we've tried to push out through the training that we're offering.
Because we've had this sort of report brought to us before, and if I remember rightly, Wales Audit estimated across Wales, now doesn't just Monmouthshire, that the amount of fraud could amount to maybe £100 million. Spread that around different councils, you're talking a considerable amount of money for each council. How did Wales Office come to the view that it could be that amount of loss across Wales every year? It's a big chunk of money. It build mega station next week, that would. So what tools have the Audit Office got in place to try and to get to that figure and to try and reduce the figure?
Well, okay. So that figure was I think a range, and I think it was caveated heavily by being an estimate. But Charlotte, I don't know if you can provide any sort of thoughts in terms of Audit Wales' estimates about fraud across the public sector in Wales.
Yeah, I'll do my best. I wasn't involved in that original review back in 2020, but I believe that estimate comes from the UK Government Cabinet Office. It was based on an estimate sort of extrapolated across the whole of the public sector, and then we took that figure and applied it to the public sector in Wales. That figure is disputed. It is an extrapolated number. It doesn't mean that you could therefore sort of take that and divide it equally by each council, for example, and the amount of fraud will vary. I probably can't comment any more than that. As I say, I wasn't involved in that original piece of work. But yeah, I think most councils that we've spoken to about this figure don't recognise that it is as high as that. Certainly the amount of fraud that individual councils are highlighting through their own investigations comes nowhere near that. Obviously, there may well be fraud which hasn't been identified. But yeah, I'm afraid I can't really make any sort of conclusion on how accurate that figure is.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. But I'll go to Peter Davis, our Deputy Chief Executive, for some comment, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think a really good question. I think Jan has responded to it really well. I think the only additional point I'd look to make, which I think the committee can directly engage in, is ultimately what you do here as a committee. So in terms of gaining your assurances around the control environment in the council, everything that I guess internal audit does through its work, which is around systems and controls, making sure that there is appropriate monitoring in place, segregation of duties, and that transcends into, I guess, things such as our procurement work and activity, and making sure that there is appropriate segregation, all of the things that look to mitigate and avoid such instances of fraud, bribery and corruption. So it is, I know Jan, you've responded there in terms of absolutely and correctly in terms of what we're looking to do in terms of bringing that level of general awareness around so that instances of fraud can be identified and highlighted. But our additional safeguards are, in fact, with regards to how we govern and run the council, and making sure that our procedures and policies are being correctly followed. And that's why the committee's here in gaining that wider assurance.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Move on, please. Colin, next.
Thanks, Chair. Just looking at the recommendations, I was, and I think I raised this previously with internally with audit, is why, and it may be a contractual issue, why we're not using recurring intrusive financial vetting with staff in key posts. Because from my mandatory training, fraud training this morning, unmanageable debt, it can be a key trigger to offending, and seems an effective tool to me in the battle against fraud. So I think if perhaps Charlotte and Jan could maybe answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. So we have looked at a few systems since the Audit Wales report that can provide that information and provide counter-fraud checks as part of pre-employment checks. The problem, well, it's not so much a problem, it's the cost of that system, and we have to do a cost-benefit analysis to see whether that would be worth something that we could implement. It is significant costs on an annual basis to bring that kind of system in place. And that's something that we are currently considering, and we will bring back as part of the updated fraud risk assessment.
Thank you. Charlotte, do you have anything to add to what Jan said in respect of what other councils do in this space? Maybe quite helpful.
Yeah, we've not seen other councils use that. Again, I think that's one of the types of areas that we haven't referred specifically to that in recommendation 2, but that's the type of thing we mean. Appreciate that there is a considerable cost involved. I think that is something that councils are sort of citing back to us, which is where the potential sort of collaboration and joint working might help that in terms of helping share that burden of cost and looking at the cost benefit and whether that's worthwhile.
Did you want to come back, Phil?
Yes, Chair. It was just picking up from my earlier question. We had a pretty comprehensive answer from Matt Gatehouse, but I just wondered if Charlotte wanted to add anything from Audit Wales's point of view. It was the question about not maximising the use of data analytics and formal intelligence sharing arrangements.
Yeah, I would say of the 2 recommendations, recommendation 1 is probably the key one from our point of view. Recommendation 2, I think, is more around there's potential to do more rather than as necessarily having any sort of serious concerns about the arrangements that are currently in place. I think it was really positive what Matt said before about that potential collaborative work around sort of data analytics. Given the costs involved, I think that's probably an appropriate way forwards. And this recommendation really is about the council assuring itself about those opportunities that are available, which it's not currently sort of maximising, and looking at whether that is something that they ought to take forward and on what basis they could do that to add to the arrangements that are already in place. As I say, this was more about extending the arrangements already in place rather than as being concerned about any serious gaps in what's currently there.
Thank you. Can I check, Rodri, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, thanks, Chair. The report here from Audit Wales highlights a zero tolerance approach, and a few paragraphs later it says about all staff should complete training by the end of June 2025. Later in today's papers we have an internal audit report that says as of the 20th of May the overall completion rate is 56.3%. So there's a couple of questions around that. One would be around the use of the term mandatory, because I think my definition may be different, and is the council on target to meet it? Because obviously there's only 3 weeks left of the month, and what is the council doing to ensure that that mandatory training is going to be completed?
Thank you. So, yeah, in terms of our completion rate, you're quite right in saying that, yeah, it was 56% as of May. I haven't got the latest stats in front of me. Some service areas are doing better than others. Some service areas we're hitting 80% plus coverage, others not so much. The difficulty that we do have is we're trying to push this out over an online e-learning system, and we do recognise that there's some members of staff across the organisation that don't have access onto the e-learning system yet, or the ability to be able to do that training. That's something that we are having conversations about, how we can get out to those harder to reach areas across the council, and as well as getting out to schools and making sure that school-based staff have the same level of training. So those are conversations that I'm currently picking up with the respective chief officers, trying to work out a plan to drive that figure up as high as we possibly can get. And as well, that it's also worth mentioning that the figures also include staff that might be off work for a variety of different reasons. So it could be that they're on maternity leave or long-term sickness, so that will always take the figures down considerably until they return to work and be able to do the course themselves.
So, yeah, just picking up on that, the headline figure is extremely disappointing. I note some of the explanations you've made, but I don't think it leaves us in a very comfortable place. So, when can you come back to us with an updated figure and a plan and a concrete plan to ensure that a reasonable level of people have completed the training?
I can come back next meeting with the updated stats, and then we can have a depending on discussion, I'll bring this through to SLT over the next couple of weeks, and we can hopefully bring back a plan of how we're going to drive that forward.
I think that'd be quite helpful. So maybe my follow-up question is, who's accountable for this? So your internal audit third line. So whilst you have some responsibility for anti-fraud measures, who is the accountable officer responsible for ensuring that staff complete this training, if indeed it is mandatory?
Well, ultimately, it's the head of paid service, but I'm not going to throw that one at him. It'll be me, but it'll probably be me in conjunction with Matt, who's chief officer responsible for obviously workforce matters, which obviously includes training as well. Just to satisfy the committee, it's been the subject of a number of conversations, both at the strategic leadership team table as much as outside of it. And I think, as has been touched on, I think we've identified some innate difficulties in terms of being able to reach out successfully to different cohorts of staff, I guess, who traditionally may not have a laptop and just, as you and I, just simply be able to access the training. So I think there is still a conversation to work through here to identify different methods and means to be able to get that completion rate not just up, but complete. Because it's what it says on the tin. When there are a small and selective number of training modules that are seen as being mandatory, marked as essential training, and if they're mandatory, that's ultimately what it means. So, accountability certainly lies with myself, principally with regards to the anti-fraud, bribery and corruption training, but in conjunction with Matt, I guess, more broadly. And in terms of essential training, I see Matt's just seamlessly put his hand up, so either through you, Chair, or otherwise for Matt to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Come in, Matt.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and as Peter has just outlined, I've got the responsibility for the training element of this. Yeah, just to remind members of the committee, we implemented a new online training system which came on tap sort of September, October of last year. We've been tracking all of the mandatory training. We have hit somewhat of a plateau, as Peter's alluded to. And the actions we're working on at the moment are how to push that out and make sure that all of those colleagues in the organisation are accessing that. That would be things like QR codes in workplaces where people don't traditionally access a laptop for their work, so they can scan that, access the training on their own personal devices. And where we still have difficulties, we will be arranging toolbox talks style training sessions where we actually go in and if we have a particularly hard to reach cohort, we will arrange for that training to be delivered face to face in those workplaces. But rest assured, we will not stop until we get that sort of optimal level of compliance.
Okay, thank you both for those helpful comments. Nonetheless, I do think it would be helpful for this committee in due course to come back with a paper setting out in a bit more of a granular fashion completion rates across different cohorts of staff. I do fully recognise you have a diverse range of staff across this council, some of whom are not office-based, some don't have access to laptops, and of course some people on long-term sick or absence from work. But I do think we need some better quality data to get comfortable that the completion rates are overall satisfactory. Maybe, Wendy, if you could make a note of that action, please, and work with Jan to put it on the forward work plan for the committee. Thank you. In conclusion of this item, then, may I thank Audit Wales for their work, for their helpful report, and of course for two officers for their management response and the work they are progressing in terms of closing out those action points. We now move on to item 7. Item 7 is the effectiveness of a strategic risk assessment framework. This item will be introduced by Richard Jones, Performance and Data Insight Manager, and Hannah Carter. So over to you, Richard and Hannah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. So this is hopefully now fairly familiar to the committee, the regular report providing an assessment of our effectiveness of our risk management policy to you. This report follows the initial agreed implementation phase of our strategic risk management policy, which was revised in June 2024, and we agreed a phased implementation of it up until March of this year. So just to highlight really to the committee some of the progress made and new requirements implemented so far. So we've included the addition of risk categories and target risk scores into the strategic risk register, and you'll see those summarised within the report. We've also included within the risk register assessment of risk appetite in line with our risk appetite statement and levels that was agreed as part of the policy when it was taken through in June. And also, which is a new addition to the report today, we've now developed a risk radar, which is summarised in Appendix 4 for the committee. As a reminder, the radar outlines some of the potential risks that may face Monmouthshire, not just the council, but the wider county within the coming years, picking out evidence as we draw from a range of different national and global horizon scanning reports. This is very much our first version of this risk radar. It's something we look to continue to develop and also periodically update as various horizon scanning reports are updated. It is an important addition to our risk management arrangements. And just to probably clarify its use in our risk management arrangements, it'll help us support risk identification, so it'll inform both the strategic risk register and some of our linked risk management arrangements as well in identifying risk and hoping to also support any subsequent assessment around mitigating actions that need to be undertaken, but also, it's also will be helpful as a policy tool for the organisation when it looks at its strategic planning and its service planning to inform it as well. But the initial radar is there and it will continue to be updated. In terms of assessment of our wider framework, Appendix 1 sets that out. It largely covers what I presented to you in our overview performance management reports we brought to you at the last meeting. Hopefully you'll see assurances in terms of the progress made, not just with the implementation of the policy, but it's continued, how it's been continued embedded within our practice and processes. Probably a couple of areas we've identified that need further development that's probably important just to bring to the attention of the committee today. One is around the implementation of remaining directorate risk registers. Directorate risk registers were added into our policy last year as a key link between our strategic risk register and service planning arrangements, support directorates to more effectively manage and mitigate their risks. Some of those directorate risk registers have been put in place. There remain a few that aren't yet fully in place, and we've agreed a revised timescale as part of reporting this through strategic leadership team in the build-up to the committee today for those remaining directors to complete them by September this year. And then finally, a key part of our findings of the assessment is the need to make sure the requirements are embedded more consistently across the organisation, and one of the key actions we intend to take to support that is around risk management training to make sure those responsibility for risk are taking account and understand the requirements and then can work to embed those in their teams. So those are the two areas which take a focus for the next few months for us. Also included in the report, just to highlight, is an update on the actions plan for those linked corporate risk control arrangements. You may recall we brought a report forward to you in September with an assessment of those. This report provides you with an update on progress with the actions that we identified within those reports, and obviously that's important because they form a linked part of our wider risk management arrangements in the council. And then finally, Part 2 of the report provides an overview of the updates to our strategic risk register, provides a summary of any changes since the last report to you. Within that, it's probably important to point out that the full risk register was scrutinised by Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee last week as part of their role to hold risk owners to account for progress with mitigating their risks, and the full register will also be presented to Cabinet at its meeting later in June. So some of the key points. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Great, thanks Richard. So we'll go to members. Start with Rodri, please.
Thanks, Chair. In the appendix, the audit app is highlighted. The way I read it is a risk flagged, a solution identified, and then that's not now happening like 2 years on because of personnel issues. I don't think that the cancellation really has a massive impact on the risk level, but I do think it would have made things much more efficient and effective for the implementation of recommendations. So just a comment, I do think that's a shame. In terms of a question, there's a number of actions marked in the appendix that are set for June and July. So I just wanted to check that they're all on track, the ones that are due in the next 6-7 weeks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, in terms of the training, still our intention to roll out the training in July. I think realistically, due to some pressures in teams and some statutory deadlines coming up, being realistic, there may be a risk of that slipping to a bit later in the year. But as I said, that is an important commitment for us to fulfil, but with other statutory deadlines within the team, being realistic to the committee capacity will be a bit stretched. But in terms of the other actions around completing the activity in response to the internal audit review, assessment of progress with risk control arrangements on the report, I think those actions through the arrangements we've put in place for this updated risk register, we're comfortable those will be completed.
Are there any other questions or comments, please? No, okay, right, okay. So from my perspective, firstly, thanks for the report. I think it's really positive. I think we are continue to see improvements in the overall risk framework. I thought the paper was very comprehensive, very insightful, and the direction of travel is clearly something myself and this committee fully support. So well done. I'm very keen that risk disciplines are fully embedded across the council. That's important because I do believe there's real value in an effective risk management approach. So Richard, could you maybe say a few words about your comfort or level of satisfaction with the extent to which risk disciplines are being embedded across the council, and then secondly, whether you need any support or advice from this committee in terms of encouraging people to use this risk framework? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. Again, I think the implementation of the new policy is helping us strengthen our risk arrangements in terms of embedding that across the council. We've seen things like an improvement in the quality of risk registers being undertaken in service plans, which helps to demonstrate to us that at a service level risk management is improving. And also, the development of some of those directorate risk registers help ensure that a directorate level risk is strengthening risk management as well. Nonetheless, I think, in line with my comments about the need to develop our training to ensure consistency application of risk, that remains an area where we can improve as an organisation. The service plan quality assurance undertake has shown improvement, but it still shows there's some way to go in some areas and some plans to strengthen their identification of risk within them. And also I've mentioned that the completion of those further directorate risk registers as well will be an important part in making sure that's consistently embedded across the council. And those are messages which have also consistently been fed back and agreed to as part of the reporting this through strategic leadership team, which is embedded in the policy. So I think, for this committee, it's those two messages really. Probably one you can hold me to account on in terms of the training, and then one perhaps to make sure the organisation is held to account for in terms of completing those risk registers, both service and directorate, which we facilitate but can't complete for people.
Thank you, Richard. We will do so. So, yet, not too surprising. So, you come back to us in due course with progress in respect to those directorate level risk registers, because we're very keen to support you, the team, in ensuring that people are doing what is required. So, thank you, Richard. So, in conclusion, I think we can take comfort from the report and the good progress being made in respect of developing and further embedding our risk management processes. We'll move on now to item 10. Item 10 is the Internal Audit Annual Report for the last financial year, and this paper will be introduced by Jan Furtek, our Chief Internal Auditor. So over to you, Jan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the public sector internal audit standards, and from April 25, the global internal audit standards require the Chief Internal Auditor to provide an annual opinion based on the work performed and the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the framework of governance, risk management and internal control. This is achieved through a risk-based internal audit plan of work that's been agreed by management and the Governance and Audit Committee. So internal audit provides an independent, objective, assurance and consulting activity designed to add value to an organisation. So overall, I'm reporting that the overall opinion for the 24-25 financial year at Monmouthshire Council was that we can deem reasonable assurance, which indicates that there's generally a sound system of governance, risk management and control in place. This opinion does not imply that internal audit has reviewed all risks relating to the organisation, and we've conducted our work using a risk-based approach. So the objectives of the internal audit team for the year were to deliver an internal audit service in accordance with the public sector internal audit standards, to undertake risk-based assessments of the authority's internal control environment and contribute to the annual governance statement, and to maintain and enhance audit involvement in all areas to demonstrate good financial stewardship and protection of public funds. So we deem to have met these objectives for the year, and overall the internal audit team has completed 81% of the agreed audit plan against a target of 80%. The individual audit opinions issued during the year are shown in Appendix B. Overall, 35 audit opinions were issued, ranging from 3 substantial, 21 reasonable and 9 limited assurance. It was pleasing to note there was no assurance reviews. For the 9 limited assurance audit opinions, the detail as to why those reviews were deemed to be limited assurance has been provided to Audit Committee previously, apart from 3 reviews which are being reported in this report for the first time today. These are supply staff at schools, communities and place contract management and the pupil referral service. Further details why those reviews were deemed to be limited assurance are contained within Appendix F to H in the report. Overall, while not all planned audit reviews were carried out during the year, the actual number achieved is considered acceptable in a view of relative risk and the priorities of other audit needs. Planned audit work not undertaken during the year is shown as Appendix C, and a number of those audits were carried forward into the current financial year. During the course of the year, the team also completed 3 unplanned and reactive pieces of work in addition to completion of our audit plan, and those were bank imprest at 7V Residential, anti-fraud, corruption and bribery risk assessments, and financial assessments of domiciliary care tenders. So during the 23-24 year and into the start of the 24-25 year, the Deputy Chief Executive, along with the Chair of the Audit Committee and myself, considered the future delivery model for internal audit, and a report regarding this was considered by the committee in April last year. The internal audit team started the year with a full establishment of 5 full-time equivalent auditors, and that remained in place for the year. Within the restructure, it was agreed to add a new post into the structure of a counter-fraud officer, and that was recruited to in October 24, with the officer commencing work in January this year. For the whole year, myself as Chief Internal Auditor has continued to be employed on an acting basis following the departure of the previous post holder, and the recruitment process for this position is currently underway. In terms of non-audit duties, we now have minimal involvement in non-audit duties, and these just relate to controlled stationery in terms of receipt books, and also a small number of in-press accounts which we have been closing down, but for operational reasons require a small number to still be in place. In terms of fraud and irregularity, the internal audit team have been involved in 9 special investigations during the course of the year, and the detail of those can be found in Appendix 8 of the report. The most time-consuming of these was at Caldecott School, which we've previously discussed, and it followed an unfavourable audit opinion and subsequent HR processes being undertaken. This took a substantial amount of time across the whole of the internal audit team. Where necessary, the investigations undertaken have been discussed with the police, either through safeguarding practitioner concerns or through separate referrals to Action Fraud and the Gwent Police Financial Investigations Unit. The internal audit team is responsible for coordinating the National Fraud Initiative on behalf of the Council, and this biannual data matching exercise is across the UK public sector, and we are currently reviewing the data matches released earlier this year. The Council's first fraud risk assessment was completed during 24-25 and presented to the Governance and Audit Committee in January. This will be reviewed during the 25-26 year and an updated version brought back through to committee for review in October. Over the course of the year, and as we previously mentioned today, the internal audit team developed a training module on the ThinkKey e-learning system covering fraud, corruption and bribery. This is deemed mandatory for all staff and members of the Council. It's pleasing to report that all members of the strategic leadership team and their respective management teams have completed the module, and completion as of the 20th of May was 56.3%. It was noted that this completion rate would be affected by staff who are on long-term absence, either through sickness, extended leave or maternity leave. So in conclusion, it's considered that over the course of the year, the objectives of the internal audit team have been met. The reporting procedures in all areas of the team are now well established and embedded, and working practices as a matter of course to underpin our quality of work. We have team meetings on a regular basis to ensure all staff are kept aware of new developments and managers can monitor the progress of work against our plan. The team's management maintained a continuous review process throughout the year to ensure where possible the highest risk areas were targeted within our operational plan for 25-26, and that was developed to ensure priority areas outstanding would be covered in any next financial year. The objective of the internal audit team is to provide assurance to management and members on the adequacy of the internal control environment, governance arrangements and risk management processes. Any reduced audit staff over the course of the year will lead to less coverage to the services being provided. And in addition, if the team becomes subject to any special investigations and allegations of fraud, we become less flexible to be able to respond to those if the team resource is not there. So I will have to monitor that situation closely, use a range of options to ensure appropriate audit coverage is provided throughout the year. And any demands, and although demands on our resource are increasing, I am confident that there is currently adequate and appropriate coverage that will be provided during 25-26 across the Council. So finally, I want to acknowledge the support of all the audit staff within my team for a job well done during 24-25, and as well as senior management across the Council in helping us to maintain a comprehensive and valuable service to the authority. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. That was very helpful. We'll go to questions as you suggest. Rodri, over to you first, please.
Thanks, Chair. The former Chief Internal Auditor left more than 2 years ago. The report highlights that the recruitment process for this position is currently underway. I just wondered if we had any timelines on that.
Yeah, I'll just turn to Peter Davis, our Deputy Chief Executive, for some comment, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So we would be aiming to conclude based on the dates that are being firmed up, and I should have the specific dates, obviously, to take through for interview by close of play tomorrow, communicated out, and with an anticipated completion date by the end of the month.
Thank you. I beg your pardon. Any other questions or comments? So you, Pete.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to raise the issues that are in Appendix F about supply teachers. some concerns here. We've got a limited assurance on this one, with some critical and significant risks raised. It's been brought before us, but I think we're caught in a crossfire here, because on the one hand, it's really the responsibility, or it is the responsibility of the school governing bodies, rather than directly ourselves to manage that budget. But on the other hand, we have the Welsh Government, who have put in place back in 2019, not 2023 as it says in the report, what they call a framework, whereas a list has been drawn up of approved supply agencies in an attempt to ensure that there are proper terms and conditions of service, and indeed the Welsh Government, at least at some stage, was trying to go farther than that in an attempt to avoid expensive supply agencies by drawing up a national pool where schools could employ those people direct through the Welsh Government. It actually enlisted 4,500 teachers and did new DBS checks on them all, but now that seems to have either been put on hold, mothballed, or abandoned altogether, with money, being wasted on that. But going back to the framework, one of the risks issues that is raised is the number of schools that are spending a lot of money on agencies that are not part of that framework, and indeed it seems that governing bodies aren't even aware of the framework. So I'm just wondering, although it's not our direct responsibility, should we be doing more to raise those concerns that are in the Appendix F there, and in particular the importance of using the approved agencies? Thank you.
Thank you. It's quite a lot there. Turn to Jan in the first instance, and then, if appropriate, I'll ask Matt Gatehouse or Pete Davis to comment, recognising, of course, that this is a question not entirely within the remit of the Governance Audit Committee. If they don't feel able to comment or respond, that's fine. Jan in the first instance, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just first of all, I just reiterate to committee that safeguarding measures were found to be satisfactory as part of our review, so they weren't a cause for concern. So our concerns related into the procurement of the supply agencies. As you mentioned, it's the gift of each school's individual governing body to decide how they spend their delegated funding. We come in as internal audit to ensure that money has been spent in accordance with the various different acts, and in this case the Procurement Act, and that schools are getting value for money. So we found through our review that a considerable amount of money had been spent with off-framework suppliers. And where we've questioned the reasons why those suppliers have been selected, it wasn't demonstrated to us that an open recruitment and tender process had been conducted on a recent basis to ensure that that supplier had been appointed in line with the public procurement thresholds, contract procedure rules, and from February this year, the Procurement Act. That's where our concerns lie. Obviously, if schools use the Welsh Government framework, then they don't have to do any additional market testing. They are using a set framework that's been recommended by Welsh Government. But if they choose to go off framework, then they need to ensure that those the procurement legislation has been fully followed. And that's where our concern was. As you mentioned, our concern was also that governing bodies may not be necessarily aware that might have happened. We haven't been able to find for a number of the schools information within the governing body minutes to confirm that they've been presented with and approved the decision by the senior management at the school to use those particular agencies. So that needs addressing out of those schools as well. In terms of moving this forward, I know the school's finance manager has met with head teachers last week to present the audit findings to them. And now that is up for head teachers to obviously take forward to look to address our concerns, and because it's an unfavourable opinion, we will be following this up probably next financial year now to allow schools hopefully to complete the required tendering processes.
Thank you. That seems quite a comprehensive response, but I do note some of your wider concerns. Can I just turn to Matt Gatehouse? Matt, do you have anything to add to what you've heard so far, please?
I think, Chair, probably there's not a lot I can add at this stage to update over and above that which Jan has already said. But in light of the audit opinion, it is one that I'll be talking with my teams about and making sure we keep a close eye on to ensure that shifts forward.
That's great, thank you. Peter Davis.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of supplementary points. I guess first off, with John in front of me, and I'm not drawing him in for comment, but just in line of sight, just Jan mentioning, I guess, Nikki Wellington and her role working with the team and across and into schools. So I guess there are natural triggers here, I guess, in terms of agency supply spend, and I guess assurances that are sought through that process, that is appropriate. That'll only get you to a certain point, I guess, in terms of identifying patterns of spend and the like. I guess the second point, and therefore then looking at Jan, because he will know, because we've been engaged in some of the conversations through with Ardle as our procurement partner. And there's been questions which I've worked through with Will McLean, the Chief Officer, with Nikki herself, just to make sure that we've got appropriate arrangements in place for schools to be brought in to the Ardle arrangement for advice and guidance. I can certainly make sure, given strategic procurement now sits with me in terms of portfolio responsibility, both one of myself or Kath Fallon will look to pick this up with colleagues in Ardle and make sure that's given some visibility for action.
That's great, thank you, it's very helpful. We're happy with that response, Peter. Do you want to come back?
I'm pleased to hear a meeting's already been held, and but it's been followed up, and look forward to seeing what progress has been made when it comes back to us, presumably in a year's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Chair, could I just say something? Perhaps it could be brought to the Monmouthshire Association of Governors, which meets here on a quarterly basis. I'm part of that committee, and if then we can get a clear indication across to governors throughout the Monmouthshire as to what their responsibilities are for this situation.
Thank you, John. That sounds sensible.
Yes, happy to do that. I went to the last Monmouthshire Association School Governors meeting just to present about internal audit and give a heads up of what we do out at schools. But obviously that was prior to this report being released. So yeah, we can take that to a future meeting.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up, so let's move to conclude this item. Firstly, Jan, excellent paper, really helpful, gives us a lot of assurance in terms of the robustness of the control environment, which is great, and it gives us confidence that those actions those recommendations you propose to management are being implemented, so that's good. You've quite rightly noted some activity which is not standard internal audit fare, including control stationery. You will undoubtedly be aware that's a trigger point for me, and I would encourage you to allocate that responsibility to another function forthwith. It's not commensurate with the public internal audit standards, as you well know, so the quicker we remove that from your remit, the better. Otherwise, thank you for the report. We take great comfort from the opinion that you've given and look forward to your periodic updates on audit activity this year. Thank you. Okay, if we could move on then to item 11. Item 11 is the Treasury Outturned Report for last financial year. This will be introduced by John Davis, Head of Finance, ably assisted by Dan Francis. So over to you, John and Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So this is the final Treasury Management update for the 24-25 financial year. It's the fourth one the committee has received. I think I've mentioned previously it's been quite a volatile year for Treasury Management activities. I think members will certainly recognised that from the media and the news throughout the year. But I think what we've had in place is quite a flexible strategy that was approved by Council now back over a year ago. That's probably allowed us to navigate that fairly easily as a Treasury team. So I think just going through some of the main points of the report. The Bank of England base rate has reduced over the year, as we can see there in the table in the covering report. That hasn't had the commensurate impact on our borrowing rates. As you can see there, the UK gilt yield rate has increased. So it's got an inverse relationship there during the year, and that very much just is due to the volatility that we've seen in the market. It's those political issues that we've seen internationally that have impacted on financial market sentiment, that have impacted those rates. So whilst we've increased our borrowing during the year, we have borrowed quite short term in anticipation that more favourable rates will be available in the near future. That does slightly increase our risk, our refinancing risk, as those loans mature. So you'll see, I think, within the report, I think it's table 7, there's a maturity profile of our loans, and a greater proportion of those loans are maturing within the next 2 years. So that's something we're monitoring quite closely as a team. We don't want to be overly exposed to that refinancing risk, given the volatility we're still seeing in the markets. Our average investment rate has remained fairly stable through the year, and I think pleasingly it stacks up well against our peers. That's primarily due to the fact that we have a greater proportion of our investments within pooled funds. Those are continuing to return excellent income returns, well above what we can generate in terms of cash. And that has pushed up our rate of return, despite the Bank of England base rate reductions that we've seen. The other positive, I think, through the year is in terms of our lender option, borrower option loans, LOBOs for short. Those are now fully extinguished, meaning we have no further loans. We're not exposed to that refinancing risk that can come at you quite quickly with those loan instruments. So that is a positive as we move forward. In terms of our pooled funds, we do still carry unrealised capital losses. Again, a positive that's come to light towards the end of the financial year is that the statutory override, that means that we don't have to recognise those losses within our revenue budget in any one year. That statutory override has been extended now for existing investments to the 1st of April 2029. So that immediate risk of having to recognise that capital loss goes away for now. We do still maintain a sufficient Treasury reserve to mitigate those potential losses, and we'll continue to hold that reserve whilst those are in place. We do continue to invest in a specific ESG, environmental, social and governance product, and we will continue to do that off the back of the commitments by this committee and by Council over recent years to prioritise such investments. We'll continue to look for additional options that allow us to expand on that investment as well. And I think just finally touching upon our non-Treasury investments, I think primarily we talk about our commercial investments when we do so. Those did generate an overall return during the year, very slight positive return. But that was inclusive of some provision for bad debt during the year, which was quite significant of just over £400,000. So if that was excluded, that return would have been nearer 1.5%. Can't go into the reasons too much for that bad debt provision. Legal proceedings are still ongoing, so I don't want to compromise any progress that we're making on that front. However, I think it's right and appropriate that we recognise that that potential for that bad debt, and I think the wider revenue budget outturn for last financial year has allowed us to accommodate that provision more widely. So I think that allows us to probably de-risk ourselves within that investment. Chair, lots of other detail within the report, but I think I'll leave it as that as the key points. Thanks.
Thanks, John. We'll go to questions. Phil, please.
Thank you, Chair. On the pooled investments, there's no plans to crystallise any of those losses. You're not going to, because you only actually make the loss if you cash in the bonds, don't you? So we're just going to keep it there and take the income, are we?
I think. Councillor Murphy, the investments have done their job. I think when cash was returning near enough zero post-pandemic, these pooled funds were still returning 3% and 4%. So in that sense, they've achieved what we set out to do with them. Whilst they continue to return, well over cash returns, it's sensible to maintain them. I'm not saying we wouldn't take an opportunity to disinvest if the situation was right in terms of those capital losses. So we remain open and flexible to that possibility. But our Treasury advisors are continually monitoring that situation as we move forward.
It'd be nice if we got capital gains just to set up against, wouldn't it? One other question, Chair, if I may. This credit score, that's altered quite substantially, isn't it? On 3.2 rating.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a funny indicator, this, because our investments balances are so low. Certainly compared to our peers as well. So when you're carrying 10-15 million pounds of investments, a slight change in credit rating or amount held with one investment body can shift that quite easily. It has increased, so it's a positive movement towards the end of the year. But primarily that will be that a greater amount of our investments were probably with the UK government rather than perhaps our own banking provider at the end of the year.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Right, not seeing any other hands up. Maybe just following on from a question in respect to credit risk, table 14. Could you remind me, John, these credit ratings, where are they derived from? Are they from one of your rating agencies, or, for example, S&P, or something else, please?
So
Thanks, Chair. It's a combination of, I think, the three main credit agencies, S&P being one, Standard & Poor's. It's been a while since I've looked at the other two, so I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but it's a mix of those, and that indicator is then put together through a process by our Treasury advisors that allows us a direct comparison of those with and between other organisations.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to remind myself of the provenance of those credit ratings. My second minor question, and it is a minor question, Table 5 in respect of the LOBO loans. So you've talked about the LOBO loans being repaid during the period, which is not surprising given the new rate proposed. It's nearly doubled, which is astonishing. Do we have any other LOBO loans outstanding, please?
That is the final one, Chair. So it's pleasing that risk goes away now for the remainder as we move forward.
Thank you. And one ancillary question. Do we have any insight in terms of why the change between the rate previously sort of imposed versus the new rate proposed? I say it's nearly not quite doubled, but near as damn it.
Quite simply, I think some of these organisations now have been taken over by other bodies. They simply want to move away from public sector or local authority arrangements and want to move into to different avenues. So when the opportunity arose for them, they chose to make it punitive for us to remain with that loan.
Thank you. That's what I suspected. Thank you for that. I'm not seeing any of the hands up, so once again, may I thank you, John, and also Dan, for the comprehensive paper, also for verbal overlay and your willingness to answer our questions. Clearly, we can take comfort from the outturn for the last financial year. Thank you once again. If we could then move on to item 13. Item 13 is the Forward Work Programme. Our next meeting is on the 24th of July. So are there any questions or comments on that Forward Work Programme, please? No? In which case, if we could look at item 14 to review and note the minutes of a previous meeting held on 2nd of June, some 12 days ago or so. I'm content with them. Thank you, Wendy, for taking those minutes. I'm not looking for committee to approve them. I'll take them as read. And then finally, to note the date of next meeting, 24th of July at 2 p.m. And that concludes this committee meeting. Many thanks, one and all.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.